As protests grow by the day calling for Brazil's President Michel Temer to step down, a new thread has been pulled loose in the web of corruption scandals that have ensnared him. 3 senior politicians, including a close aide to Temer, were detained by police. They're accused of inflating the cost of a World Cup stadium in the capital, Brasilia, by more than $260 million in return for bribes from construction company Odebrecht. It's a familiar story in Brazil. Nearly a third of Temer's cabinet now faces corruption allegations. The arrests were made a week after Brazil's Attorney General formally accused Temer himself of corruption and obstructing justice.
Eu estou lá me defendendo.
The Supreme Court is investigating the charges,
Que eu mais ou menos dei conta de fazer até agora.
And a secret recording of a telephone conversation in which Temer appears to discuss paying money to cover up corruption. The man on the other end of the phone, who made the recording, is the co-owner of Brazil's biggest meatpacking firm. Joesley Batista struck a plea bargain with prosecutors. He says Temer approved the payments.
Eu ouvi do presidente claramente ele dizendo que era importante manter isso. Enfim, a primeira missão minha lá era essa, era ir lá saber dele se o compromisso ainda era necessário, né? Ele me disse de pronto que sim.
According to Batista, the payments amounted to $300,000 a month, made to former Speaker of the House, Eduardo Cunha. Cunha was allegedly being paid for his silence regarding Temer and other politicians' part in Brazil's sprawling pay-to-play scheme involving state oil firm Petrobras. Temer says the allegations are false and that the tape recording was doctored. But his opponents say he's already lost credibility, with his approval rating now in the single digits. While Michel Temer's predecessor, Dilma Rousseff, was forced out of office on separate charges, the Petrobras scandal set the stage for her impeachment last year. Temer and Cunha orchestrated it, seizing on a wave of public anger over corruption. Now they've both been caught in its wake. Cunha has been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison for graft. And now opposition senators have filed an impeachment petition against Temer and have called for new elections. Temer has said he won't step down. He's sought to deflect the allegations leveled against him, stressing that the country needs political stability to stay the economic course.
O Brasil, meus senhores, exige que se continue no caminho da recuperação econômica que traçamos para colocar o país nos trilhos. Já recuperamos o PIB, acabamos com a recessão, reduzimos a inflação.
Brazil's central bank has said that the economy will re-emerge this quarter from its deepest recession, reaching 3% growth by the final quarter of the year. But that's done little to allay the growing public anger against Temer. And as he struggles to hold on to power, his administration appears to be unraveling around him. The allegations against him are stacking up as Brazilians become further disillusioned with their political system. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss what Brazil's future has in store, we're joined by Rodrigo Nunes in Rio de Janeiro. He's a political analyst and author of Organization of the Organizationless. And from London, we have Francisco Dominguez, the co-author of Right-Wing Politics in the New Latin America. And from Washington, D.C., we have James Roberts, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a former U.S. diplomat who served in Latin America. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Rodrigo, let me begin with you. Is Brazil in a phase of extreme political crisis?
Well, clearly, yes. I mean, it was clear from the start that Temer was going to be a stopgap solution. The reason why Dilma Rousseff was impeached and why he was put there was basically a deal struck between a political class hounded by corruption allegations and finance and big business, which had an interest in using this economic and political crisis as an opportunity for passing a certain amount of reforms that they were interested in and that are ultimately only good for them. The problem is that was always going to be a very unstable agreement because on the one hand, these measures, these reforms are highly unpopular. For example, 72% of the population are against the proposed pension reforms that the government are discussing now. And on the other hand, the corruption allegations are very strong. The investigations continue. and they continue to involve the political class. And basically, this is what's happened now. The investigations got to Temer, and so the market fears that he won't be able to deliver the measures, and they've started looking somewhere else.
Okay, and you brought up some interesting points there. Let me ask Francisco Dominguez, if we could look at the passion of the protesters, which one is it? Are they more against the policies, like, you know, the pension policies and so on, or are they more against the fact that they feel he's as corrupt as the previous regime and they feel that the politicians are dirty? Which one is it?
I think it's both of them. And the reason is obvious. The people who are now running the government and their supporters in the Congress and in the Senate made a huge campaign which lasted for a year regarding the fight against corruption, on the back of which they managed to impeach the president, the democratically elected president. Now everybody knows, and there is absolutely ample and irrefutable evidence, that the corrupt ones is them. And not only they're corrupt to the extent that they are, and that I'm sure there is more stuff that is going to come out, but they are implementing one of the worst imaginable neoliberal programs that is affecting millions and millions of people, including middle-class people.
Francisco,
and if you take the two together, then
sure,
there is no question about it.
Right.
That is, people are mobilizing for the two of them. The government basically is imploding.
Okay, it's interesting that you say that, but isn't it more plausible that actually Dilma was also corrupt? I mean, we have 3 years of evidence building up with car wash. So is it more plausible that, yes, Dilma was corrupt, and then this guy is also corrupt, they're all corrupt, rather than the corrupt ones impeached the innocent ones?
She was accused of pedaladas fiscais. She was accused of financial maneuvering, something that every single president in Brazil has been practicing since 1995. And the same political class accepted this financial maneuvering every single other time, except when it came to her. Remember, she was impeached on those grounds, not on any other grounds, and even she was not barred from standing for office, which is the case with every single politician that's been found to be corrupt, such as Eduardo Cunha. So I don't think there is any evidence yet to demonstrate that she was corrupt as they are.
James Roberts, should Temer step down now?
Well, maybe, but here's the thing. The corruption among the politicians in Brazil is a big deal. Corruption and cronyism, and we talk about that every year in the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom. But a bigger deal and a more pressing problem for Brazil is the need to push these reforms that Temer is pushing on labor code and on pensions. The labor code in Brazil dates from 1943. It has allowed the existence of 17,000 different unions in Brazil. By comparison, there are only 168 unions in the United Kingdom. Why so many unions? That gives workers the right to almost shut down companies and to demand things that the judicial system does not enforce the labor code properly. It has had a chilling effect on investment on a private business.
Right.
The pension system that was
Roberts,
put in place mostly by
allow
Lula,
me to jump in here.
that is unsustainable.
Sure.
That allows people to...
Sure,
the pension system allows people to retire in their early 50s, and that's just not sustainable.
And that's an economic argument from the right? So you disagree with the current system and you feel these reforms need to be made. Fair enough. But if the people in a democracy, at the moment,
if Temer...
Sure, if I could just finish the question. In a democracy, less than 10% of the population actually back him right now. They consider him dirty and they feel, hey, we didn't vote this guy into office. With all of that in mind, even though you feel the reforms should be pushed through, maybe somebody else has to push those reforms through. Don't you think, sir?
Right. Maybe somebody else will have to, but the reforms will have to go through, even if it's not by Temer. The political class is corrupt in Brazil. It's been well known. I mean, the election that got Dilma reelected was also corrupt, and there was a lot of questions about whether that was really a free and fair election. And that, in fact, the bad memories of that on people on the center right is a lot of what pushed Dilma out, I think.
For a moment, let's just listen to what the president had to say when people wanted him to step down. He was bullish. Let's have a little listen to what he had to say.
Não renunciarei.
I won't resign.
Repito.
I repeat,
Não renunciarei.
I won't resign. I know what I did. and I know my actions were right. I demand a full and quick investigation to clear up the situation for the Brazilian people.
Let me ask Rodrigo Nunes. Rodrigo, is he making the right decision by doubling down, by saying, hey, that audio tape was doctored, I won't resign, I'm in it for the long haul and I'm here to fix this country?
Well, Temer, like most of the top brass in the government, like a huge chunk of the political class in Brazil, have no other option but to double down at this point. Their backs are against the wall. They know that if, and he in particular knows, that if he renounces, chances are he'll be arrested pretty soon. And this is what he's negotiating at the moment. He's negotiating the possible terms for his renunciation because the people who put in there feel that he's no use anymore because he won't be able to pass the reforms. Now, I want to go back on the issue of the reforms. I think many people, most people in Brazil agree that the country needs reforms. The problem is what reforms and how are they going to be done? One of the advantages that Temer had, so to speak, was precisely the fact that he didn't care about legitimacy at all. The kinds of reforms that are being pushed now were defeated at the ballot in the last 4 elections, and they're being pushed by a government that wasn't elected and that has 4% approval ratings at the last count, and that was before the political scandal.
Good point. So let's pose that to James Roberts before Francisco comes back in. James Roberts, the people don't want these reports.
If I could just finish.
Okay, finish your point. Go ahead, Rodrigo.
So what I was going to say is there are a number of reforms that PT should have passed in the period they were in power, the Workers' Party. They failed to do so. For example, a progressive tax reform. Brazil has one of the most regressive tax systems in the world. It didn't do that then, and that was a huge problem. What we're seeing now is reforms that are going to entrench the privileges and the problems that PT should have dealt with and failed to do.
Okay, so James
the
Roberts,
situation is only going to get worse.
Okay, then James, the people don't want these reforms. How do you deal with that in a democracy?
Well, some people want them and some don't. And these elections, especially the last one, have been very. These reforms are divided in terms of who wants them and who doesn't. But the last election was very, very close, and that's why some people say that it was not completely fair and transparent. And so to say that the people of Brazil don't want this, I think, is an overstep. I think many people in Brazil do want these reforms. They know they're not sustainable. They know that OECD countries, people have to work till they're 67, like in the United States. People can't retire in their early 50s. The government can't financially and fiscally sustain that. So things like that have to be changed. And that's what the center-right party of Temer is trying to do, is trying to force these reforms. And I'll say one very good thing is coming out of this, and that is the strength of Brazil's institutions, especially its judiciary. The prosecutor in car wash, Moro, he's a folk hero in Brazil because the people know how corrupt the system is at the top. And they are cheering for somebody to stand up, somebody honest and clean and competent to take on this corruption. And so that's what I hope for Brazil will continue. Even if Temer is replaced by someone else, the reforms have to continue, and the judicial and other institutions of Brazil have to continue to stand tall and stand firm.
Okay, Francisco Dominguez, I know you probably don't agree with James Roberts on a lot of the politics, but do you agree with him that the judiciary has proved itself to be impartial here and solid and something that's trustworthy?
Well, just briefly on the economy. In 2002, Brazil's GDP was 600 billion. By 2012-13, the country had 2.7 trillion GDP. 40 million people were taken out of poverty without any problem. The economy grew like never before in the history of that nation. There was plenty of resources to actually distribute around and continue with the policies that the Workers' Party and the previous governments were actually doing. This government came to do exactly the opposite, taking advantage of the economic difficulties caused in Brazil by the world economic crisis. In terms of the judiciary, I think there is a big question mark regarding how many of them are actually will pass a good exam regarding not being corrupt. There are people who are so openly partisan regarding what they do as judges, such as Gilmar Mendes and such as Sergio Moro, who is engaged in persecution, for example, of people such as Lula for 3 years without any evidence, and continues to leak information to the media in order to create a campaign. This has never been done anywhere in the world. So therefore, it seems to me that the judiciary now that is being strengthened is a good thing, but it's 10% of what is required.
But it's interesting.
And I think once you reform the judiciary, you need to reform actually the whole political system. How is it possible that the Supreme Court accepts the impeachment against Dilma Rousseff when it had actually no constitutional basis whatsoever? And this is an indication of part of the problem that Brazil needs to reform. And I agree with Rodrigo Núñez that there is plenty of reform that needs to be done, but not the kind that James is suggesting.
From the outside, we look at the attorneys and we look at the courts, and we saw them going after the left-wingers last year, and we see them going after the centre-right politicians this year. That shows some robustness. They look impartial to me from the outside, don't they, Francisco?
Well, in terms of this particular investigation, they do, but I suppose the road is so intense that there was very little else they can do. And remember, the previous head of the Supreme Court actually died in a plane accident, and the new one that's taken over, Janot, actually seems to be getting things done. There is much more that needs to be done, because the number of people who are involved at the level of the political class, particularly in the Congress and in the Senate, that are involved in corruption is too many. So many of them actually have been investigated for years and years and years, and nothing has been done against them, such as Aécio Neves, who is just beginning to feel the pinch, and it's not clear exactly where that is going to go. So yes, it looks okay in a superficial way, but there is much more that needs to be done. And I think it's a step forward, a small one, what is being done now, but there is much more that needs for the cleaning of the whole house.
Right. Rodrigo, would an election go a long way to sorting out Brazil's problems in the next 12 months?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that it would mean that the reform program, which this government is pushing without having submitted it to the popular will, would have to be discussed publicly. And I would like to see someone defend these kinds of measures, which are highly unpopular at the moment. 72%, again, are against the pension reform. 68% are against the labor code reform. So in that sense, yes, that it would force the people who are arguing for these reforms to seek a popular mandate for them. And I doubt that they would get it. On the other hand, any result that could come out of elections at this point, either this year or next year, are more likely to be a symptom rather than a solution to the political crisis we're going through. Basically, what we're seeing is a very profound crisis of trust in the political class, in the political system as a whole, and institutions themselves, which aren't working that well if we analyze it carefully.
Francisco, do you want Lula to stage a comeback? Do you think he's the man?
Well, I think I have a slightly different take. It seems to me that the situation is the following. The political class, and it's very obvious and it's public already, they are discussing the possibility of impeaching Temer because his position is totally untenable, and perhaps deciding to elect somebody indirectly by decision of the Senate and the Congress. If they were to do that, the amount of legitimacy that Temer has will not, the next person will have even less for a start. And I think it's very likely that the country will explode. Already people are in the streets, and it's up to them to decide whether they want Lula or somebody else. But clearly the case, if there are, as they call themselves, diretas já, which is, direct elections right now, I think at least the country will be taken back to the path of democracy, so that somebody who is elected will have the possibility of discussing democratically what is to be done regarding the problems that the nation faces. Anything else short of that is just going to make the crisis much worse. And for me, the question is how long Temer is going to survive, and what sort of a scheme the political class are going to come up with, which I think it looks very unlikely to be the right one.
Yeah, lots of questions about Temer's future and the future politically of the country. We'll be keeping a close eye on Brazil. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to all three of you.